This kind of a conversation sounds like the kind of thing that would be on some sort of weather channel now, to say, oh, back in whatever.
Welcome to Real Siblings, It Ain't Easy, a real estate podcast with the goal to educate, inform, and save their listeners time as they navigate the market and properties in their neighborhoods. Get ready to join real-life siblings and professional real estate advisors, Donna Reed and Eric Seemann, as they discuss how it may be simple, but it ain't always easy.
Every time I think about the places I have known, I realize that times have changed. So I'll do what I can to make this house into a home. Yeah, yeah.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Real Siblings, It Ain't Easy, a real estate podcast that just ain't typical. I'm Donna, and this is Eric, and we are the Real Siblings. We are both professional realtors with Keller Williams. And this week, we are going to talk about life along Mud Creek. Oh, wait, Creek, C-R-E-E-K. But
We're from the Midwest.
We're from the Midwest, so I say Creek. This podcast blends together lifestyle and real estate as we work to communicate, connect, and entertain our listeners. While the topics vary and our conversations do go in many directions, we work to provide our listeners with insights into the industry, better equipping them for their next real estate transaction. So today, if you're watching, as compared to just listening, you will see the images behind us represent very, very much of that little town where we grew up. Behind me is a painting I did of the house that from 1868 that we lived in on Lynn Street with our parents. And behind Eric is a t-shirt that I think the Tree Commission put together a few years ago, Small Town Deep Roots Lindsey, and the book that we're going to talk about today. So Eric, why don't you...
Okay, see, and I just thought that was Lindsey swag. I didn't even know there was a tree commission. What?
Yeah, about all those trees that are along where the train used to go in the park and stuff. Yeah. So there you go.
Okay, tree commission shirt.
Yeah, let's talk about Siegen.
From the opening stands in the book in the prologue, Mud Creek winds down from Hessville and beyond, and during most of the year, it plays and dimples over occasional rocks and tiny sandbars. Most seasons, it is like this, except in the spring when in a fit of madness, it rushes over its banks and gluttons itself on the rich topsoil until it assumes the earthly tones that give it its name, Mud Creek.
So Eric, why are we talking about Siegen and Mud Creek and this book today?
Well, the author of this book is an original descendant of families from the town of Lindsey. She grew up to be an educator. She was a school teacher for you. By the time I was in school, she was no longer teaching full time, but she was a substitute for me on a regular basis. She was a member of our church. We delivered newspapers to her. In the summers when family came to town, her children's children, they'd spend in playtime with us.
Over at the
She
park.
was just an integral part. And she decided at one point, I'm going to try to capture the essence of Lindsey in a book.
Yeah. And I think her daughter Anne did the illustrations, right? I believe
Yes.
her.
And did the illustrations.
Yeah. So tiny little town, you all, if you've been listening to any of these, or if you happen to live in Lindsey, you know that the town is roughly 500 people, a few less today. And it was a thriving community. My book is signed in 1986
As is mine.
by Mrs. Hathaway. So it gives you an idea of when she wrote it. And if you know at that point she had retired, right, and was writing the book. You looked up, did you look up her birth and her death, Eric, to see? I wonder,
I did. She was born in 1907 and she passed at age 95 in 2002.
Okay. So we'd add on another 20 years right now. And she was a teacher when we went 8 grades in our little school. And I had her, I think, the last year. And what's interesting is I had some French from her. I remember learning how to say a peach and a pear. A peach and a pear, and pêche une poire, because of random stuff that you remember. So part of this, everybody, is that, we live in different places now. We've both been where we are for 20 plus years. Are you at 30 yet? You're getting close.
I'm 32.
32 years.
32 coming up in May.
So it made us wonder about the history and who writes a book, whether it be truth or lies or a combo of both, right? This particular book is made up of stories about the different homes in town and the people that lived in those homes. And
I tried to figure out what word I would use, maybe a vignette or even a portrait. Since it's not a traditional chapter and the book is not structured to flow from an intro to a story all the way through to a conclusion, right. It is a series of vignettes. And in pulling the book out and preparing for this and starting to read some of it again, it's like, okay, but Uriah was in the first chapter. And we know, spoiler alert, Uriah's profile ends with him passing away. Yet 4 vignettes or portraits later, it talks about Uriah being there. Mm-hmm. So it's not a book that's written to flow in a storyline. It is a series of, as I say, portraits or vignettes from my standpoint about persons and about where they live, job, occupation they had in town. And again, we think small town and the fact that it's a bedroom community. Right. Aside from a couple of very small businesses right now, right. The Farmers Mercantile and Elevator Company, and the volunteer fire department and post office. And then there's a little grocery store and they sell tacos. There's a little teeny bit of lunch that you can buy at that. Yeah. Well, and that was even hard to reference because it said across from the grocery store. We know that although Mrs. Hathaway wrote the book, there was another lady in town, Shirley Stroll, mm-hmm. who was a contemporary. Oh, maybe of Kate from age and time, because they talked about playing cards together in one of her notes, going, I thought this story was buried, but then Norm mentioned when we were playing cards. Oh, interesting. Okay. So there's a point where she tried to go through and analyze the book and see the fictitious characters and who they might really be from an air quote standpoint. Well, I think we all tried to do that, don't you think? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like, who was this? Yeah. Was this person real or not? Little tangent. Mr. and Mrs. Stroll were also on the newspaper route. And I used to sell. And they lived close to us compared to where Mrs. Hathaway lived. That's true. That's true. We had to walk like 3 blocks to get to her house. But I was always selling things as a young person, Girl Scout cookies, or I don't know. I think I sold cards and things to win trips. I don't know what I did. And band fruit. Yeah. When I would get to their door, Mr. Stroll, Norm would say, oh, it's the little salesperson. Like, oh, here we go again. So, Eric, one of the things that you and I talked about is that we know, and okay, wait, I'm gonna do air quotes. We know our house is in this book. Our house being the one behind me, which didn't start out as our house. It was Miller's, a Miller home when we bought it, right? When Dad bought it, right? And read it well, and it was the Miller house then. And when we had Daryl Nip on doing the Lindsey Homecoming In Festival, he mentioned the fact that he was related to that family. They're all related. Has ties to it. And that the story in this, even though the vignette or portrait that discusses our house, which we'll get to, that character's name is Sadie. Mm-hmm. And it was the Millers who were living in the house. She didn't change the name on that house, our house. Now, the surnames, not the surnames, the character's name. Family name. Oh, might have been changed, but the surname Miller was still part of. So it is interesting. And again, we look at it and go, gosh, small town. The fact that there was a business that was out of Indiana that decided to put a business into San Antonio that was a complete manufacturing facility for hoops, for wood barrels. In the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century, and that there were smokestacks and fires and kilns and all those kind of things. And none of that was there. Yeah. By the time we were growing up. The lumberyard. Yeah, the lumberyard was there. And I was just thinking specifically, because I lived there a little bit longer after you guys moved. I was back there for about 20 years. And I know Connie
Nowak, not sure if she still has that last name. Connie worked there. And Dale Copley, I'm pretty sure, worked there.
Wow. Okay.
Years. Yeah. And it probably, they can tell us if they listen to this, they can tell us it changed names or it became a conglomerate or whatever. But just down from Mud Creek, where we would ice skate and you guys would fish and things like that, at the bottom of the hill was where the lumber yard was. And when you look at the old postcards and the old pictures and the dirt roads, and you see how many trees were there and where the lumber was from, it's fascinating to me. And that was there for most of the time that I lived in Lindsey. I don't remember when it closed.
Well, and doing some of the research for this, Donna, looking at Mrs. Hathaway's father, he was buried ultimately out at the cemetery at 4 Mile House Road.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And that even made me think, how many nicknames for streets? It's like, we used to ask mom and dad coming from Fremont back to Lindsey, can we drive down Barnfire Road? Or can we take 4 Mile House Road? Rather than go all the way to 590. We drive that way all the time.
Yeah, and 590, we called 590, but we didn't call like 109 and 106, 109, 106.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So nicknames for roads and where they were at. And there's more in the book where and I guess let me step back. The book is called Siegen because our town, Lindsey, was settled primarily by German immigrants. Overmeyers, Millers, Nips. There were names that were just very, very German.
Bunches of
Overmeyer was probably one of the dominant. Auxter's German. So she didn't want to name the book Lindsey. So she came up with the name Siegenthaler as a name instead of Lindsey. And then she shortened it to say, look, the Siegenthalers were the dominant family there. They named the town after them and they shortened it and they called it Siegen. So Lindsey, Siegen, same name, not the same name. The names have been changed to protect the innocent, those kinds.
The long deceased innocent. And just before we started this podcast, I told Eric that one of the home inspectors here in town, Alex Byron, I'm going to call you out. He is from Germany and he was back home. I want to just say last year, could have been 2022 at this point. I don't know. And he's from Siegen in Germany. And when I saw that, I was flabbergasted and I took a picture of this book and I sent it to him and showed him. And he was the same way. He said, what? So random things you learn through life 50 years later, right?
50 years later. So we both have autographed copies and we talked about the fact we can't take the time in this to go through every single chapter and every reference and cross-reference. We talked about that. Yeah. But we absolutely wanted to talk about Sadie's profile.
So I'm going to read
vignette. So
I'm going to read a paragraph, the second paragraph from this. So if you're looking behind her, if you know the house in Lindsey, this is talking about the woman that came there, Sadie, to work like as a maid. She lived on the third floor of the Miller's large brick house on Mulberry Street in a neat and pretty little room with sloping walls, wallpapered in a pattern of white and yellow daisies. The short, round-topped windows with their dotted Swiss curtains looked down on Beach Street and the flower beds and flowering shrubs of the wide lawn. So, corner house, across from what is now the church, what used to be the parking lot, or it's the parking lot now, used to be a home, and across from the church, big lawns. However, you and I both know that attic didn't have wallpaper. And if you were as tall as we Seemann children were, and according to this, Sadie was tall.
Yes, she was rather tall and plain looking.
Yeah. So we know that whatever else ensues in this will be a mix of truths and story.
Embellishments.
Right? And embellishments. That's good.
Is that a good word?
Yeah. And yet it's fun. It's fun to read it and think about the creativity that Mrs. Hathaway put into this, to take pieces that she knew to be true, pieces that maybe were gossip, and then to create interesting stories about the life in the small town,
Well, even the point of as grand as our house could be compared to some of the other smaller wood frame houses, the big brick house that Reverend Monk built, we don't look at it and go, well, this was a house that had servants. It had a cleaning person.
No.
Never, ever did I envision the fact or look at it. It wasn't like some larger houses, older houses, families that were European, honestly, the European houses that had a separate staircase that only the servants were allowed to use.
Right.
Maybe some of those earlier founding father mansions, East Coast estates and things like that, that had that servant's entrance and staircase and where they work. This would just happen to be a staircase up to the mansard roof area.
Right.
And yes, it says that she was tall, but by the time you put the floor in there and the ceiling, it was less than 6 foot tall that anybody could stand up.
Right. It was great storage. No doubt it was great storage. And when Mom...
a great place to put the Christmas decorations.
Yeah. And way better up there than in the basement, right? And then when Mom passed away after she had worked at Penny's and they had closed the store in Fremont, we had a whole bunch of the racks that up in the attic, clothing racks, which then it didn't make sense to me. Now it totally does, because it was as if you could shop in the attic based on whatever size Mom was at the time.
Well, size and season, right?
Size and season.
Because what was the plan? And body image and that is a whole different thing.
Right.
Mom was very tall, but she always felt like she was a little bit bigger than she wanted to be.
We all did. We all do. Some of us
do. So in shopping, she always got discounts when she had been working at Penny's. She'd get stuff on sale and apply the discount and set it aside and hang it up there. And if it was winter, she switched out and brought some of her winter stuff down and put the spring and summer stuff up. Yeah. And it probably wasn't too far away from the Marshall Fields box that we had saved for years that had wrapping and ribbons and bows and things like that for wrapping Christmas presents, right?
I think I may still have one of those boxes. Like that's the piece of history that's so hard to get rid of, And
we're not hoarders, but we do save and cherish things.
That's true. Every time I show somebody the corbels here that were on that house, So when I painted this painting, Dad had already taken down the wooden corbels and things like that. So Eric, one of the other things that you and I talked about beforehand was this piece of history about our little town and how on the Facebook pages that have groups related to our school and Retro Lindsey and all that, you start hearing comments from people. And I was thinking of Mosier's house and that beautiful parquet wooden floor, Lois Hector's house, who is related somehow to Denise Druckenmiller. Like, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we have no idea.
And so our family was there about 40 years. And that's really nothing in the grand scheme of how long people, lived there and had relationships, right?
We were transient.
Yeah.
We had no connection to the town. Mom and Dad moved out with you and Dan because of the flood in Fremont.
Right.
And when Mom had passed away and Dad was remarrying and leaving town. So it was 59 to 2001.
Yeah.
42 years.
Yeah. So I want to throw something in here just to bring it to Tucson. So Gills, my ex-husband, deceased, his grandpa and grandma came to Tucson sometime, I want to say in the 1940s, maybe 50s. I can't remember exactly, because they needed to leave Kansas because Aunt Bev had such bad lungs and they needed to come to live in a place where it was dry. And they were on the outskirts of town and they had a basement. They owned a whole big corner of town, which of course now is in town, big time in town. And grandma had a summer kitchen, grandma had a garden, all those things. And there's just so few homes, especially in the midtown, that have full basements. And they had the first, oh my gosh, I hate it when my brain does this. They had a appliance store, and it was when everybody shopped downtown, right? That was back in the days. And then Aunt Bev, who is the person that they moved here for, she ended up moving to the outskirts, literally really close to where I live now, she and Uncle Dave, in the 50s. And it was rural. And Aunt Bev passed away at the end of the year last year at 90. 4 or 5 years old, she who was not supposed to live to be past 10 or 11. And their home, probably their son Kyle will redo when they're gone, because it is exactly the same as when they built it in the 1950s. And it makes me think about the history here and the changes that I've seen in 24 years here. And you, where you are, the city is encroaching, right, in your rural space, which is part of the reason you wanted 13 acres or however many you have. You wanted the land.
Because 6.5 acres was too darn small. A neighbor could move in.
Yeah, heaven forbid. We want our treetop views. So we've seen a lot of change. And where I live specifically, you can do tours downtown and learn about the Native Americans and how long ago they were here and what they've discovered underground, and the adobe, the old adobe, which we've addressed in other episodes, what products were used, So do we have a book written about Tucson that is in any way like Siegen, Yes, there are stories that are written that are faction, is what I call them. You call them fiction. I call them.
And songs about Tucson.
Yeah.
I sent you a link the other day.
Oh.
Lonely in Tucson?
That's depressing. That's like Saturday night in Toledo, Ohio. I don't want to.
That was Kenny Rogers, right?
Or Kenny Rogers, John Denver?
No, Kenny Rogers talked about.
I spent a week there one day.
On a bar by the depot in the town of Toledo.
Okay. I'm thinking Saturday night in Toledo, Ohio. I spent a week there. Anyway, all we need to do is keep singing about Toledo. There you go. Something. So what about San Antonio? Are there any, you do so much more research than I do.
Yeah, nothing like this that I've been able to find. I have a book called San Antonio Then and Now. Department stores that have come and go, businesses that have been here and gone. Honestly, one of San Antonio's biggest legacies immediately following the Civil War was Colonel Frost. Colonel Frost started a bank. And 5 generations in, Frost Bank is still run by family of Colonel Frost. And if you go into the newest Frost Bank Tower, they have an area that shows Colonel Frost's leather-topped desk and a ledger that he personally recorded transactions on 150 years ago. But having a book that's something like this that lists specific characters, creation, trying to capture the essence, I haven't come across anything like it.
And so the book fair in Tucson happens to be this weekend, and we've had crazy, bad rainy weather. So I don't know what kind of a mucky mess it's going to be down on the mall. But the other day I met someone at a networking group from like the Czech Republic, and she's writing about Tucson. And because I was telling her about this, I was telling her about this and my book that I'm working on, which, by the way, will be vignettes, right? I'm pretty sure that's what we should call them. Thank you.
Staves. Stave one.
Anyway, and she made it sound like this is the kind of book that she's writing. So I thought, well, that would be super interesting to have someone moving here from across the world who then looks into the history of the people here. Anyway.
Captured in song a lot. San Antonio's captured in song a lot. Between the Alamo, the Ballad of the Alamo, Marty Robbins, several different artists there, George Strait singing about San Antone. Pick a Texas musician. There's probably a song that either is directly about or references San Antonio.
That's probably true. You got a whole bunch of those country singers out there, down there, over there, whatever.
Down over in there. Yes, there are.
Down over in there. So anything else, brother, that you think we should bring up related to this, except to make sure that our friends at home in Ohio know that we've discussed it, and I may go back and reread it.
It has been interesting. I'm looking at, like everything else that we've talked about, looking at it with a different set of eyes. Mm-hmm. Read it before, looked at it before, now going back, cross-referencing it to some of the notes that we have, and now even trying to make sense of what I'm reading, because the first paragraph talks about Uriah being across from the little cemetery. So is across from the driveway or across the street?
Like from Marg and Jim Schwartz's house?
Yes.
Ah.
Yes. So is the house across from the cemetery because there was a little break or a divide there? Or is it across the other side of Main Street, which is the house that we're talking about? And the big red barn, and of course, across the street from the little cemetery, as you come up, head north on 590, Main Street, there's no barn there anymore.
Right.
And I'm trying to remember in my head, when was the barn there?
Yeah. Since we moved, and I go back probably as much or more than anybody else because I lived there a little longer. It's interesting to me who is still there and what generation. So when Andrea Opelt Smith, married a Smith who was catty corner from us in this home right here. And their kids, her boys, have already bought homes kind of back in that area. And many of the Overmeyers, right, are within 15, 20 miles, some of them on farms and just like dad and grandpa and stuff did. And then there's those who they're not, some the kids are in Columbus or Cincinnati, and they're the last of their generation of being in that town or in that space or farming the farm or whatever the case may be. So it's a mix. I guess it's like everywhere else, but because the town is small, for me, it's more obvious, right?
Right. And how far a small town can reach. I don't know if you remember, there's an associate pastor that worked with our friend Andrew.
Yeah.
Jess is the daughter of a bandmate of Ken and mine from our days at Fremont Ross, who ended up living in Lindsey. And here we are down in San Antonio. She's working. San Antonio, as we've discussed, 2.5 million people, and she's down the hall from a gentleman, very good friend of mine, best friend, 20 plus years. And it's like, no way. Your mom is what? That can't be.
Yeah.
So small towns can have a really, really big set of roots per the San Antonio. Lindsey Tree. What did you say it?
The Tree Commission. Yeah.
Lindsey Tree Commission, managing oaks and maples along the north coast inland corridor.
You know what? Before we wrap it up, I do want to mention that when I read that little section about the house, she used Mulberry and Beach Streets, which are not the names, but definitely at least one is a tree, because and I do that here. It's sort of funny because the names that get used, because I live in Serrata Guerrero and I'm near La Cañada and La Choya, and the names that are part of the culture of where I live now. But I'm not sure if we have a oak or a maple or a elm.
Right.
Street anywhere in town. So you want to? All
right. So we're going to close this a little bit differently. We opened with a paragraph from the beginning in the prologue of the book, Siegen, and I'm going to close it with the final paragraph. Basically, the people there are the same, though curious but kindly, proud but caring. The Victorian houses stand proudly on its tree-named streets, and the gravel road runs out past where the tile mill used to be to the cemetery, where all those who now rest among the marble and granite headstones between rows of hemlock on the hillside by Mud Creek.
Which is where our parents rest.
It is.
Which can make me weepy as we wrap this up. So different ending. Real Siblings, it ain't easy. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing a piece of our history. And until the next time, I'm Donna.
And I'm Eric.
And we are
Real Siblings.
Every time I think about the places I have known, I realize that times have changed. So I'll do what I can to make this house into a home. Yeah.
I'm Annabelle, and I want to thank you for investing your valuable time in listening to Real Sibling, It Ain't Easy. I hope you found this episode informative and enjoyable. There are several ways you can support this podcast with my Grandpa Eric and Aunt Grandma. Please take the time to like, follow, and subscribe. Additionally, leave them a 5-star rating along with a review on your preferred podcast platform. The final thing I would ask is that you recommend this podcast to a friend, a family member, or an associate. Your engagement is critical to their ongoing success, and they look forward to connecting. Check out the show notes Grandpa put together with their contact information, including emails, phone numbers, and website. And remember, the real siblings look forward to hearing from you.